There is a specific kind of silence that fills a courtroom just before a verdict is read. It's not peaceful. It's not calm. It's the kind of silence that presses against your chest like a hand, like something is holding your breath for you, deciding whether to give it back. I remember that silence. I remember every detail of that day. The hard wooden bench beneath me, the smell of old paper and cold air conditioning, the sound of my own heartbeat louder than anything else in that room. But what I remember most was looking across the aisle and seeing my father's face and knowing, even before the judge spoke a single word, that the man I had trusted my entire life had just told the most devastating lie of his existence. My name is Layla. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside, big enough to impress the neighbors, quiet enough to hide everything that was broken inside. My father, Daniel, was a man people respected, a man who wore suits and shook hands and smiled in photographs. He was charming, he was generous, he was the kind of man who made speeches at community dinners about integrity and family values, and everyone clapped. And I believed every single word he said. That's the thing about loving someone too much. You stop seeing them clearly. You see what they want you to see. You see what they've spent years carefully building for you to see. My mother passed away when I was 11 years old, a car accident on a rainy Tuesday night. And just like that, it was only me and my father left in that big, quiet house. He raised me. He paid for my school. He walked me through every heartbreak, every disappointment. When I graduated from university, he cried in the front row, proud tears, he called them. I never had reason to doubt him, until the day I found the will. My grandmother, my mother's mother, passed away 3 years ago. She was the warmest woman I'd ever known. Small hands, soft voice, always smelling like rosewater and cardamom. She had a house in the old part of the city, a house that had been in the family for decades, and she left it to me. That was what her will said. I know because her lawyer told me, because she had sat down with that lawyer, signed those papers, and made sure her granddaughter, her only grandchild, would always have something that was hers. But here is what I didn't know that day, sitting in the lawyer's office, nodding quietly and feeling warm with gratitude. The property had already been transferred. 3 months before my grandmother died, while she was sick in the hospital and barely lucid enough to recognize faces, someone had gotten her to sign a second document, a document that gave the property to my father, and my father had sold it. When I found out, I felt nothing at first. That's how betrayal works sometimes. It doesn't hit you all at once. It starts as confusion, a cold, quiet confusion that makes you think, surely there's a mistake. Surely there's an explanation. Surely the man who raised me, who held my hand at my mother's funeral, who called me every Sunday morning without fail, surely he did not do this. I called him. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Layla, sweetheart, is everything okay?" I asked him about the property. There was a pause, and then he said, "Your grandmother wanted me to handle it. She was confused near the end, you know that. She asked me to take care of things. I was protecting the family." Protecting the family. I held the phone against my ear for a long time after he said that. My hand was shaking. My throat felt like someone had wrapped a fist around it. He had stolen from a dying woman, from my grandmother, from me. And he called it protection. That was the moment something inside me stopped breaking and started deciding. I want you to understand something. Filing a legal case against your own father is not something you do in a moment of anger. It is not something you decide over one sleepless night or one painful phone call. It is something you decide slowly, painfully, with shaking hands and a breaking heart, after you've tried everything else. I gave him chances, more than he deserved. I went to see him in person. I sat in his living room, the same living room where I'd opened birthday presents and watched old movies and fallen asleep on the sofa as a child. And I looked him in the eyes and I asked him to do the right thing. Dad, that house belonged to grandmother. She wanted me to have it. You know that. I know that. Please, just fix this. He sat very still for a moment, and then he said, calmly, the way someone says something they've rehearsed, Layla, I did what I had to do. The property had debts. I cleared them. You don't understand the financial situation. Then explain it to me. You wouldn't understand. That phrase, you wouldn't understand, was something he had said to me my whole life whenever he wanted to shut a conversation down. When I asked about money as a teenager, when I asked why certain relatives stopped visiting, when I asked about my mother's side of the family, you wouldn't understand. But I was not a child anymore, and this time I was going to understand everything. I hired a lawyer, a young woman named Sarah, sharp and quiet and thorough, who spent 3 weeks going through every document, every transfer record, every signature. What she found was worse than I had imagined. The document my grandmother had signed, the one transferring the property to my father, had been signed at 11 p.m. on a night when hospital records showed she had been given a heavy sedative. She was not coherent. She could barely hold a pen. And there was a witness signature on that document, a name I recognized, my father's business partner, a man who had been to our house for dinners, a man who had once given me a card on my graduation day that said, wishing you every success, you're a wonderful young woman. Both of them, together. The night before the court hearing, I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and I thought about every memory I had of my father, every Sunday call, every proud smile. Every time he said, you are the most important thing in my life, Layla. And I thought, was any of it real? I don't know if there is anything more painful than loving someone and not knowing what was true. But here is what I also thought about. My grandmother, a woman who had worked her whole life to hold on to that house, who had told me, more than once, sitting at her kitchen table over cups of tea, one day this will be yours. I want you to have something that is truly yours. She had trusted her son-in-law, and he had walked into a hospital room when she was barely conscious, held a pen to her hand, and taken everything she had meant to give me. That thought, that image, made the grief harden into something else. It made it iron. The morning of the hearing, I wore a navy dress that my grandmother had once told me looked elegant. I don't know why I chose it. Maybe I just wanted her there with me somehow. My father arrived at the courthouse with his lawyer, an expensive one, the kind with a leather briefcase and a practiced expression of confidence. When he saw me, he walked over. He looked tired, a little older than I remembered. He said, quietly, Layla, it's not too late to drop this. Think about what you're doing to this family. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I said, I'm thinking about it, Dad. I'm thinking about exactly what has been done to this family. And I walked inside. The hearing was supposed to be simple. A presentation of evidence, a few arguments, a decision. But nothing about that day felt simple. My father's lawyer stood up and spoke confidently about family agreements, about debts, about how my father had, out of love and responsibility, stepped in to manage a complicated situation. He used words like informal arrangement and family consensus. And then he said something that made my hands go cold. He claimed that I had been informed of the transfer, that I had agreed to it, that there was an email sent from my account acknowledging the situation. An email from my account. I turned to look at my father. He was staring straight ahead. My lawyer, Sarah, leaned close to me and whispered, "Don't react, we have something." And that was when I understood. That was the moment I saw the whole picture. He hadn't just stolen the property, he had built a backup plan, a fabricated paper trail designed to implicate me, to make it look like I had known, like I had been complicit. If the case ever reached a courtroom, he would use it against me. He had planned for this, he had prepared, and he had almost gotten away with it. Sarah stood up and presented our evidence methodically. The hospital records showing my grandmother's sedation, the timeline of the signing, the testimony from a nurse who had been on duty that night and remembered the visit, remembered feeling uneasy about it but not knowing what to do. And then she addressed the email. She had worked with a digital forensics expert who had traced the metadata. The email had been sent from my account, but from a device that had never been in my possession. It had been sent from an IP address registered to my father's office. He had accessed my email account. He had written the message himself. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses and a very still face, looked at the evidence for a long moment, and then she looked at my father. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. There's a particular tone that justice takes when it finally arrives. It doesn't shout, it doesn't thunder, it just speaks clearly into the silence that has been waiting for it. She said, "The evidence presented indicates that the transfer of this property was obtained under circumstances that do not meet the legal standard of informed consent. The court finds the transfer invalid." She paused. "Furthermore, the submission of fabricated correspondence as evidence constitutes a serious breach. This matter will be referred for further investigation." My father's face, I will never forget it. It didn't collapse all at once. It fell slowly, piece by piece, like something that had been held together for a very long time by the careful effort of performance and could not hold any longer. He looked old. He looked tired. He looked like a man standing in the ruin of something he had built with lies, finally seeing it clearly for the first time. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad, because I had spent my whole life loving that man, and some part of me, some small, stubborn, deeply human part of me, had been hoping, even in that courtroom, that there was an explanation I hadn't found yet, that there was a version of this story where he was still the father I remembered. There wasn't. The property was returned to my grandmother's estate and passed to me as she had intended. I went there on a quiet Saturday morning. I stood in the small front garden, the same garden where I used to sit with her as a child, and I let myself cry. Not from grief, not from anger, but from the kind of exhaustion that comes at the end of a very long fight. She had wanted me to have something that was truly mine, and no matter how hard someone tried to take it, it found its way back. Because truth, I've learned, is very patient. It doesn't rush, it doesn't panic, it doesn't need to. It simply waits for the moment when everything false collapses around it, and then it stands there, quiet and steady, in the open air. If you are carrying a secret that someone else wants buried, keep going. If you are fighting alone in a room full of people who believe a comfortable lie, keep going. Your grandmother, your mother, your own reflection, someone in your story is counting on you to see it through. And sometimes the most powerful moment isn't when you raise your voice, it's when you sit still, hold your truth, and let the lie destroy itself. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.